Hello, welcome back to the Eddie V Show. I'm your host. It's good to be back with you. Sorry I missed yesterday. It was a long day of manual labor, and I just didn't feel like getting on the old podcast. It will never happen again. It'll probably happen again, but hopefully not too much. But we're back on Wednesday, so it's all okay. Got a couple topics today, and we're just going to get right into it. The first thing I want to talk about is I was watching a Trent Horn video 2 days ago. And I forgot the title. It's kind of a funny title. It's like Gay Jew something something changes something. I'm not really going to really talk about the specific topic, but kind of stuff surrounding the topic having to do with Nostra Aetate. So we'll get into that. And then if we have time, I also want to get into some history I've been reading about the Catholic Church and education. And this actually stems from me kind of being incorrect. I was in a conversation the other day with someone and I was spouting off some incorrect stuff. And I was like, wait, I should probably look into that more before I keep going. So this is kind of the fruit of that research. It's pretty interesting. So stick around for that. And then the third thing we might get into is some more Saint Therese on the spiritual life. We're still going through the fulfillment of all desire. I know it's been a while, I think, since I've talked about it, but I do want to get back into that. So we will get back into that. Maybe today, possibly tomorrow. Let me take a drink. So let's get into it. The first thing we'll talk about is a Trent Horn video. Again, it was a weird title. I don't remember what the exact title was, but he was critiquing a video by Redeemed Zoomer. I'm actually not super familiar with that guy. I know he's a controversial figure. The things he talks about, I haven't been super interested in, at least the ones that the titles I've seen. But Trent Horn did a great job, I think, picking apart Redeemed Zoomer's video. But I do want to touch on a couple things that he was discussing. Not necessarily, I think Trent Horn did a great job with this, actually. Usually with this type of topic, I don't really trust Trent Horn, but I'm not sure if my computer's charging. I don't really trust Trent Horn, but I thought he did pretty good with this one. So I want to give him credit where credit is due. He usually does a great job. I just think he kind of has like motives. I think maybe that's too aggressive for me. I don't know him as a person, but it does seem like he has some blind spots, whether that's on purpose or not. I don't know, but that's the reason I usually am critical of him. But he did a great job with this one. But I do want to talk about Nostra Aetate in general, because I know, and I've had some discussions even recently about Vatican II in general. If you don't know, Nostra Aetate was not a constitution, but it was a declaration from Vatican II. There was four main constitutions, and there was I can't remember, a lot of little declarations, and Nostra Aetate was one of them. It's really known as like the Muslim Jewish document, but it's supposed to be about like our relation, the church's relation to all of the other religions in the world. So yeah, I want to talk about that briefly because Trent Horn was discussing the idea that are Jews saved through Christ, or do they still have their old covenant and it's still solid with God? Honestly, I think that's a no, that doesn't go anywhere. And what do I mean by that? I don't remember. Let's assume that the Jews still have all of their covenants with God intact, and there seems to be some biblical support on this. So I'm not saying I believe that, but I'm saying let's just assume that, because I think even if we assume that, it's not really a problem. So the big thing that comes up usually is, well, are the Jews saved by Christ, or are they saved by their other covenants if those are still in effect? And I would say I don't even think it matters, because I don't recall, and I'll let if anyone out there has the information from the Old Testament. And I've read the Old Testament. I don't remember God promising the Jews salvation through any of the previous covenants. So even if all of their covenants are intact, I don't think it means that they don't need Christ to be saved. I don't see any evidence of that. And it seems like people already assume that. They assume like, oh, the old covenants are still strong, kind of this dispensationalist attitude. It just means, that the Jews are they're still following their covenant. And okay, let's if they're following their own covenant, did God ever promise like through the law you will achieve salvation or something like that? Or through Abraham you will achieve salvation? I promise Abraham these things. It's like no, there were other promises like to Abraham, there were promises to David, different things like this. None of them involving salvation from the law, from being Jewish, from Abraham's line, anything like that, except for what had to do with the Messiah. So, yeah, I think it's a non-issue. And if anyone has, this verse or anything, I'm happy to look into it. I just never have seen that. I've never understood it that way. So when, Trent Horn is doing backflips to, be like, oh, maybe the old covenant is still going strong and the Jews do their own thing and stuff. It's like, yeah, maybe they are doing their own thing, but it has nothing to do with their eternal salvation. That's only going to be through Christ, which makes it still extremely important that the Catholic Church evangelizes Jews. He does make if I remember correctly, he makes the point that the church doesn't have like a specific arm of the church that's specifically ordered towards converting the Jews. I don't think that's really necessary. And he was making the argument like it would be insulting to the Jews. I don't know. Maybe it would be, maybe it wouldn't be. But we don't need a specific arm to do that. Everyone should just be doing that with every person of every other religion and even of Christian denominations, because there is no salvation outside the church. So we don't need a specific arm. So I agree with him there. I don't know if it would be insulting to them. And even if it would be insulting to them, I don't even know if it would necessarily be a bad thing to have. But that was the first thing with Nostra Aetate, because a lot of people use that document to say like, oh, the Jews don't need Christ or something, which is, I don't see that in the document. I don't see that biblically with the old covenants. So I just think it's a non-starter. The second thing I want to talk about, which is in Nostra Aetate talks about, hopefully I'm saying that right. I've heard it pronounced different ways, but hopefully I'm pronouncing it right. In Nostra Aetate, they talk, or the church fathers, not the church fathers, the council fathers, discuss anti-Semitism, and obviously they say it's a bad thing. And a lot of people read that and they get very upset about it for whatever reason. I don't think that just makes sense for the church to say. Anti-Semitism is bad. If we're interpreting anti-Semitism to mean hatred of Jewish people because they're Jewish, or just hatred of, a race, hatred of a ethnicity, hatred of religion, or the people of that religion, is like, maybe you could hate the religion, but you shouldn't hate the people, and you shouldn't, want ill for them. I think that's certainly not a good thing. So I don't mind the council fathers putting that in, that we condemn anti-Semitism. That seems like a very straightforward thing to me. So what I would say though is, and this is maybe the issue that we can talk about, is, and this is something that maybe people like Trent Horn are dance around or they don't even think about, is that the term anti-Semitism and other terms like racism are used as weapons to halt controversial discussion, to halt dialogue, to halt the truth, I would say, basically. And what do I mean by that? So it has become maybe the norm in modern society to use these words like anti-Semitism and racism to mean any sort of critique or commentary about a certain group of people. And that can be a race, ethnicity, religion, nationality, even a club or something. But the fact of the matter is that this has become a bludgeon. And this is not like a new thing I'm talking about, but this has become a bludgeon to be used on people when they bring up something that might have some merit, but it has to do with a specific group. And I think we do need to get past that. It seems like we are getting past that, which it might go too far the other way, where we're going to like go back to Nazism or something. But the problem you have is that people have a legitimate, sometimes legitimate, or let's just say a critique. People have a critique of a specific group, and for whatever reason, people are like, you're not allowed to be able to critique groups. And if you critique a group at all, you are accused of anti-Semitism, racism, etc., which I think is just insane. So if you mean, yeah, don't be anti-Semitic, and I understand that people will try to use this line of argument I'm using to be like, oh, look at me, I'm not anti-Semitic, I'm just revealing the truth. And I think we just have to use our common sense and our reason to be able to discern the difference between someone actually just discussing something real and true and someone just, saying, "Oh, this is the truth," to be racist, to be anti-Semitic. And I think there's a difference there. But that's I think the issue, and the big issue I've had with Trent Horn since the beginning, and maybe it's just he's just one man, and everyone makes mistakes. I make mistakes all the time, but it just seems he has a motive where if someone has a motive in something, it seems like they're always everyone kind of has to talk about the truth. It seems in general to be convincing, but what someone who has a motive is they'll just talk about one specific part of the truth and not discuss the other parts of the truth. Which when you start to see that, you can't even like it's hard to even associate with that person, especially when they won't acknowledge what they're doing. So I might have done that too, but I'm always open. Hopefully, I'm always open to hearing people be like, "Oh, you missed this part or that part," and I'm happy to look into it, and I'll either refute or be like, "Hey, I'm wrong. You're correct. I left this part out." And that's what I see a lot with, I'll say, Catholic commentators like Trent Horn. I usually it's kind of maybe a little derogatory, but I usually say like the Catholic Answers crowd because I see that a lot with them. They do great with like Protestantism, but when you get in these more controversial subjects, it definitely seems like they have a motive. Whether you get political or about the Muslims or the Jews or even like the Mormons and stuff like that, I do see like kind of a little a little slant, which we don't want to be slanted. We don't want to be slanted at all. And I'll just mention this. It's kind of funny because now there's definitely this slant in Christian circles, or I guess maybe specifically Catholic and some other Protestants, where they're starting to be able to talk about the Jews in maybe some honest ways and some, kind of wild ways. But then I'm also seeing this weird thing too in Catholic circles as that's happening, I see like Christians talking really positively about Islam or about Muslims. And like that's okay to do, but like some things are just getting a little insane, a little ridiculous, where we're like making Muslims out to be so great when I would say no, Islam is not great. One thing was, and it was, I thought it was, I was really happy about it. I think it was yesterday. Tucker Carlson was interviewing this theologian, this Christian theologian, and the guy was talking about how the Muslims are so great, how kind the Ottoman Empire treated Christians. And it's like, brother, that's just crazy. And I'm like, is how much is I used to think this was not true. I remember when I was first, introduced to Tucker, and you had the Jewish crowd would say, when Tucker went like anti-Israel, the Jewish crowd would be like, is Tucker Qatarlson, he's paid by Qatar or Qatar. And I was like, maybe that's not true. But then the way he does stuff now, I'm like, he has this really weird pro-Muslim. It's not like a lot, it just comes out a little bit, and you're like, what are we even doing here? We don't want to be Jewish. We don't want to be Muslim. We want to love them. We want them to convert, but like, not, yeah, you're not going to convince me that they're great. Those religions. It's just insane. Anyway, that's kind of off the topic. And so in conclusion, I guess, I would love if Trent Horn wants to get political or these other guys want to, dive into politics. I know it's like a lot of it's theological, but they do dive into politics a lot, so if you're going to dive in there, you got to understand the full breadth of the arena. And so I would love to see people like Trent Horn talk about the history of the church in terms of relationship to the Jews. Because all I've seen Trent Horn discuss in terms of the history is like, just because your ancestors were anti-Semitic doesn't mean you have to be, or just because a church father was anti-Semitic doesn't mean you have to be. I'm kind of exaggerating, but like that is not a rigorous look at the history of the church and its relation with Jews or even with Muslims, right? Just being like like Tucker Carlson's theologian, like, oh, the Ottomans were so nice to the Christians in this one or two things. It's like, well, let's get a full view of what's going on. And so I want to see Trent Horn discuss, why is St. Louis a saint of the church? Doesn't mean he's infallible. I know that he'll say that. Just because he's a saint doesn't mean he's infallible. I understand that. But let's look at the reality of what's happening. Why does St. Louis kick out the Jews from France? Why is St. Louis burning the Talmud? What is in the Talmud? Is anyone, is anyone from Catholic Inc. going to discuss what is in the Talmud, and let's have an honest conversation about that? Anytime you hear discussion about that, it has to be like in the underbelly of the dark web or something to hear something like that. But if the listener, if you want to just Google stuff from the Talmud about our Lord, about Our Lady, I don't even want to say them on air. It's bad. And usually the argument you hear from rabbis, people that are studying the Talmud, they'll say, oh, it's not really about that Jesus. It's not really about that Mary. But when you read it, it's pretty rough, I will say. And I would say caution yourself if you're. It is a little scandalizing, and we shouldn't hate them, but this is a reality. This is part of their sacred books. There's definitely an argument about how authoritative for the rabbinical Jews this is, but it is a reality, and I don't hear Catholic Inc. discussing this stuff. Not so we can hate them, but we need to understand fully what's going on. So, you got St. Louis, you got the Talmud. You can even look at Spain. What's happening with the Inquisition? What is the involvement of the Muslims and the Jews in terms of the Inquisition? Why are the most Catholic kings, Isabel and Ferdinand, why are they commended by the Pope for kicking out the Jews from Spain? So you can put a blanket statement, which most of these guys like to do, is like, oh, just because they did that, your ancestors, doesn't mean it was a good thing. I understand that, but let's look at why they did that. That deserves a second look, which they don't want to talk about that. And maybe there was a bad reason, maybe it was a good reason, but they don't even broach the subject at all. You can look at commentary from different church fathers, different church doctors about these religions, about the Jews, about the Muslims. These are real things to discuss, for sure. So I would love to see them discuss those things. I mentioned Lateran 4 here as well. You can read Church Ecumenical Council, their discussion of the Jews and the Muslims. And so you can get more of a well-rounded picture. I don't think the solution is, all of our Middle Age, Renaissance, early church fathers were anti-Semitic. I think that's just so lazy. There are real issues. There are real differences between Judaism, Islam, and Catholicism. There's just, you cannot get around it. So when you're trying to baby Muslims, baby Jews into being like these goodwill actors that always just, wanting our best interest, in the Catholic Church so mean, always persecuting them, is like, that is so lazy. That's not good scholarship at all. So that's one thing. Do I want to get anything? I think I had some other stuff. Oh, and I mean, I was doing, that's kind of like the past stuff. I just threw out a couple examples. You guys can do your own reading on that. I might do some stuff on John Chrysostom and the Jews, and maybe Thomas Aquinas and the Muslims. I think those things have been done already, but if it keeps coming up, I think I will do that. But I did want to include a modern look, because I do think there's these notions in the modern world that like Muslims and Jews and even Catholics are like these moral juggernauts in the culture. And so let's just look at some statistics here. And I know statistics, they're not always accurate. Take them with 1,000 grains of salt. But just to give you an idea, a lot of people don't know, maybe people know, but it seems to me they don't. On the whole, Jewish people are not pro-life. So the last polls I've seen, which there's a 2024 poll, there's like a 2015 poll, there's a 2018 poll, there might be one more poll, and you can just Google these, they're publicly available. But it's been consistent throughout. It's about, for American Jews, it's about 79 to 83% are pro-choice. So just let that sink in. So these are, and I'm just trying to dispel kind of like a misnomer, is that Jews are not like very like religiously pro-life or whatever, like this Judeo-Christian stuff. It's just not true. 79 to 83%, depending on what poll you're looking in the last 10 years, pro-choice. And I will shout out the ultra orthodox. The ultra orthodox Jews are the ones that are going to be mostly the pro-life sector of Jews. But even them, kudos to them for being pro-life. But even them, they usually, it seems from my reading, they allow for abortion in extreme circumstances, like risk to the mother, um, stuff like that. I don't know if it was for rape too, but for risk to the mother's life, they allow it, which is better than a lot of people. I understand that. And that's just for the ultra orthodox, which is a very small portion of Judaism currently. So I wanted to dispel these notions. Just to give you a comparison, American Muslims are about 56, 57%, 55% pro-choice, which is still insane. Still not good. Whereas if you get into the Catholics, it's kind of crazy. It's only about 50 something percent of Catholics that are pro-life. And that number gets into like 60% if you talk about practicing Catholics. When they measure Catholics as attending Mass every Sunday, that's not very good. But it is some of the best numbers. Actually, the best numbers in America, sadly, for the Catholic Church are, and I'll include a race here, but white evangelicals are going to be your biggest demographic of pro-life. I think there were 73% pro-life. And these are just based on polls. So I've never been given this poll. I've never taken it. So take it with, again, a grain of salt or 1,000 grains of salt. But this is just interesting numbers for everyone to think about. And you can talk about other things. These things might, if Trent Horn's listening, he might think these are anti-Semitic. But if you look at what Jewish leaders support, there is a lot of support in America by Jewish leaders of pornography, for example. You can look into ownership of Pornhub, ownership of OnlyFans. These are going to be, it's funny, people get really technical when you talk about the Pornhub thing. There is a Jewish rabbi he's not like the one owner, but he is involved in the ownership of Pornhub. And I've seen a clip of him talk about how he thinks it's a part of like their evangelization or their I think he said ministry, which is a crazy thing to say. And that's just one person. There's wild Catholic priests too. There's probably wild imams in Islam. But just to give you an idea, give you a notion of what's going on. My biggest point is that no matter which way you slice it, no matter how ecumenical the church wants to get nowadays, it is very important for people to understand that no, Judaism as a religion, Islam as a religion is an enemy of the Catholic Church. A false religion cannot be friends with the only true religion. And that doesn't mean, I think Pope Leo said it really good the other day, that doesn't mean you treat your neighbor like crap. If your neighbor is Muslim, if your neighbor is Jewish, you should treat them with kindness. But the fact of the matter is that the church has enemies, and we will always have enemies. And then the reality of that is that Christ commanded us to love our enemies, but it doesn't mean they're not our enemies. And I think people like conflate this idea. It's either they'll be like, oh, I have no enemies, or I do have enemies and I have to hate them. It's like, no, we do have enemies. Islam and Judaism are enemies of the true church, but we don't hate them. We love them. We take care of them, even if they hate us. You can think of different parables in the Gospels, the Good Samaritan. We take care of these people, even as they're hating us. What does the cross show you? The Lord is offering us salvation as he's being murdered by the Jews and the Romans. So, this will be a common thing just because of nowadays, because of the current atmosphere, the current culture. This will be a subject that comes up a lot. But as there's real anti-Semitism rising. So any person of goodwill who knows the truth, we're going to be the ones that are going to have to fight back. Right now there's a huge shift towards truth speaking and different things like that, but there's also a huge shift towards Nazism and actual anti-Semitism and racism. So being able to openly talk about this stuff is going to be helpful, God forbid, if this actually turns into real persecution of Jews and Muslims and different people. Because the Christians are going to have to be the ones that are going to have to fight it. That's just the bottom line. And we will do it for the other people. We will do it for the other religions, for the other races, et cetera, et cetera. We will have to do that. And I do want, and I meant to mention this, talking about GK being anti-Semitic. There's a video he did about, is Christ saying Christ is King anti-Semitic? He called out my boy GK for being anti-Semitic. Is like, that's crazy. That's craziness. GK is and was a lover. That's insane. He took one line from GK and said it was anti-Semitic. GK is just speaking the truth. And it is interesting, just to give you another notion of how anti-Semitism is used as a weapon. G.K. Chesterton and Hilaire Belloc are often called anti-Semitic. Hilaire Belloc has a whole book called On the Jews, where he actually, if you actually read it, he has a very intelligent discussion about like who the Jews are and why they're even mentioned constantly throughout the history of the church and in Christian nations, and what to do about it, how to protect the Jews, how to also protect Christian culture, because that's the balance there. And this goes for any religion that is contrary to the Catholic faith, is when you have those people in your country, they don't want to follow Christian morality. They have their own morality that they believe in. And that will necessarily undermine the culture, the Christian culture. And he has an honest discussion about that. So if you like those two men, which I love them, I think they're both just outstanding individuals, not only in terms of their talent, but in terms of their moral integrity. So for people to call them anti-Semitic because they discussed the topic and weren't afraid to back down from saying controversial things, I'm going to have to push back against that. And you guys can read it for yourself. I believe On the Jews is free online. You can read it. GK didn't really specifically talk about the Jews, but he would mention them, and he would mention them honestly. I don't believe he had any hatred in his heart for them, but the fact of the matter is that they are a group, they're a specific group, and this world, when you're dealing with it, you're going to have to mention them if you're being honest, and the pros and cons that they bring to a Christian culture. And the popes have talked about him too, and a lot of people on the side of like everything's anti-Semitic will say, "Oh, Pope Pius the 12th, said we're spiritually Semitic," and whatever he meant by that, it's probably true. It doesn't mean we can't honestly look at what's going on with these religions. So that's that. Trent Horn, he's up and down with me. I don't know what his angle is. He is ethnically Jewish, so maybe it's just like he loves his boys. What did Ratisbone? Ratisbone was an ethnic Jew and he became Catholic, but he was saying I have to work for the conversion of my brothers in the flesh or something. Maybe Trent Horn just has maybe an over-exaggerated compassion for his brothers in the flesh or something. Or maybe not. I don't know. Maybe it's a money thing. I have no idea. It just seems like he's always missing the mark with stuff like this. Anyway, let's move on. I do want to talk about the education in the church. So I was telling someone the other day that people in the Middle Ages were very uneducated and there wasn't really educational systems. And then I kind of stopped and was like, maybe I should think about that. And I started looking into it, and it's actually pretty incredible. So in the first centuries of the church, they have the Roman Empire. But even during the Roman Empire, you had Christian, maybe not what you would think nowadays of schools, but you'd have Christian education, which usually took the form of educating people in the faith. But as you get into the Dark Ages and into the Middle Ages, you have bishops demanding in local councils or just in declarations, demanding parish priests, demanding monasteries, different religious orders to educate the faithful. And this was mostly going to revolve around the faith, educating them in the truths of the faith, usually what was it? It was the in the creed, basically how the catechism is set up now, the creed, the 10 commandments, the Our Father, stuff like that. But they would also educate them in how to read and to write, which is amazing. And obviously, as you get into the Middle Ages, a lot of people, it seems, were educated even more than that. And all of this, and a lot of these ones I'm reading about, these local councils or these bishops making these declarations, is he's demanding the parish priest and other priests to do this with no pay. So basically doing it for free for the common folk, for the lay folk, which is just amazing. You think public education, oh, America did so good. It's like, no, the church has been doing this. You even have like the 6th century. You have, not only do you have the bishop demanding in specific places, this is just the information we have, which I'm assuming these practices were widespread, because why would just one section of the church do it and not the other? Which is possible, but we take the evidence we have. You have bishops in the 6th century demanding parish priests to teach all the boys to teach them the faith, teach them how to read, stuff like that. But then you also have convents of nuns that are either demanded to or just doing it because they want to, teaching all the young girls to the faith, to read, to write, stuff like that. And you can see this consistently throughout, from the 6th century going all the way up through the Dark Ages. We even have information from the Dark Ages, the 7th century, the 8th century, the 9th century, going to the Middle Ages, which might be more obvious because you have stuff like the universities popping up a lot now. But so much education. It's so cool. So I used to say, when I didn't have any evidence or background, like, oh no, I think that's dumb. Where do they get the information that everyone was illiterate in the Middle Ages? Which is true. It's like, where do they get that information? But now I'm even saying, like, there's evidence that they probably weren't illiterate. They were getting free education for people that could read and write. And I'm not saying that we're learning math and like chemistry, but they were learning kind of the basic building blocks for future education, which is really cool. I'm not saying this is happening everywhere, but there's a lot of evidence that this was happening, and we maybe just don't have the documentation from other places. So I think that's a cool pushback against people. Even Martin Luther has a crazy quote where he says, like, there is, and take this quote with a grain of salt. I believe it is a true quote in his writings, so you can look it up. But not Pope, but Martin Luther is quoted as writing that there is no child under the papacy that goes uneducated. So even an enemy of the church is acknowledging the lengths and the efforts of the papacy, of the Catholic Church, to educate the lay faithful, which I think is just awesome. I think that's incredible. So kind of a cool little information for you. You can look that up for yourself. If you need more details, just let me know. I can point you into a couple of specific local councils and stuff like that. But yeah. And I will get into the third thing. We're going to have a full show. What are we looking at here? It's been going quite a while. We'll have another long show. It's okay. The last thing I just want to mention is Saint Therese. This is something I've been mentioning before, but I just want to hammer it home. Is Saint Therese is continuing to talk about how, living the Christian life, living a good prayer life, it has to translate into works. It has to translate into living a good life. And she and Saint Teresa of Avila and people like these different church doctors that I'm discussing, they talk about how if you have a bunch of devotions and different things like that, but it doesn't affect how you act, it doesn't increase your virtue, it doesn't increase the good works that you're performing for people around you, it's so pointless. There needs to be a translation of your prayer life, a full immersion of your, what you're speaking about with God into the way that you act into society, into your community. And they're so adamant about that, which I think, especially when I was, not especially, but when I was coming to the faith, this was never discussed. And I think this is probably a huge important thing, because what is one of the big scandals that people always talk about is like, I met this Catholic and they really sucked. And if it sucked, they just mean like, oh, they were weird or something. That doesn't matter. But if it's like, oh, they were very impatient, they were very not gentle, they were very, I'm trying to think of vices. They were lying all the time. Yeah, you could be praying like 7 hours a day and have like 1,000 devotions, but if you're still doing that stuff, doesn't matter. You need to allow the grace of God to actually change you. If my podcast had one thing I'm going to keep talking about, it is that we need to focus on obviously our relationship with God with prayer, but this needs to translate into life, to be kind, to be patient, to be loving. So that's just a brief thing from Saint Therese. We're going to keep going with Saint Therese. She's got a lot of stuff to say, and then we'll eventually get into the other saints as well. But that's all I have today. It was kind of a longer show, a couple of longer shows, which is okay. I think. Oh my goodness, what is happening? Trying to make me update right now. But that's all I have for today. Please like, subscribe, comment, share the episode. Let me know what you think. Let others know what you think. If I'm causing controversy in your family or something like that, let me know. And that's all. I'll see you all. Today's Wednesday, so tomorrow another show, God willing. I will see you then. God bless you, and God keep you until then. Goodbye.